Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the hospital room. The steady beep, beep, beep of machines echoed softly, tracking Mason Calloway's fragile heartbeat. His body felt heavy, his mind foggy from the painkillers coursing through his veins. Donating a kidney to his son, Ryder, had left him weak, but it was worth it. He would do anything for his boy. But then he heard laughter. At first he thought he was dreaming. The morphine maybe. But no, his ears didn't betray him. The sound of his wife, Savannah, giggling filled the hallway just outside his door. And then a deep, smug chuckle followed, a voice that wasn't his. Mason's stomach twisted. He turned his head slowly, careful not to pull at the force stuck in his arm. The hospital blinds were cracked just enough for him to see through the reflection in the glass. His wife stood too close to another man. Her perfectly manicured nails rested lightly on his chest, her lips curled in a smile that Mason hadn't seen in years. Colton Decker. A name Mason barely knew but suddenly despised with every fiber of his being. He really did it, Savannah laughed, shaking her head. I can't believe he actually gave up a kidney. Such a dumb, loyal dog. Colton smirked. Guess that makes things easier for us. Maybe I should send him a thank you card. Mason's heart pounded. The woman he had loved, the mother of his son, was mocking him. His vision blurred, not from pain this time but from pure, boiling rage. How long had this been going on? Mason lay still, forcing himself to control his breathing. His military training kicked in, keeping his emotions locked down like a fortress. Now wasn't the time to act. Now was the time to think. Savannah. His wife. The woman he had trusted with everything. She had been distant for months, maybe longer. It started small, late nights at work, unexplained absences, cold responses to his affection. But he had been too preoccupied with Ryder's illness to see the signs for what they were. And now he knew. A nurse entered the room, adjusting his four. How are you feeling, Mr. Calloway? Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. Fine. His voice came out hoarse. How often has my wife been visiting? The nurse hesitated, avoiding his eyes. That was all the confirmation he needed. She's been busy, I guess, the nurse finally admitted, pressing her lips into a tight line. She came in a few times, but not nearly as much as I expected. Not as much as a loving wife should. Mason felt something inside him snap. As soon as the nurse left, he reached for his phone, ignoring the sharp pain in his side. He pulled up his security camera app, logging into the feed from his house. The footage was all there. The timestamps matched the night Savannah had claimed to be working late. One video made his blood run cold. Colton. Walking through his front door. Holding a bottle of wine. And Savannah? She welcomed him in with open arms. Mason clenched his jaw so tight it hurt. He had been at the hospital, fighting to save his son's life. And she had been playing house with another man. But if Savannah thought Mason was weak, she was dead wrong. Because Mason Calloway wasn't just some broken ex-soldier. He was about to become her worst nightmare. Mason didn't react with rage. Not yet. War wasn't won through reckless action. War was won through patience, planning, and precision. He wouldn't scream at Savannah. He wouldn't confront her right away. No. He would destroy her the same way she had destroyed him. Silently, ruthlessly, and completely. But first he needed more information. With calculated movements, Mason started tracking her. He went through her phone records, credit card statements, GPS locations. The evidence piled up like a case file, every detail painting a clearer picture of Savannah's betrayal. Expensive dinners in places Mason had never been invited to. Hotel charges when she claimed to be working late. A separate bank account in her name, one Mason never knew existed. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing to leave him. A sick feeling settled in his gut, but he didn't let it control him. He needed to think like a soldier. His mind flashed back to his military days, tracking enemies, gathering intel before the final strike. This was no different. He called an old Marine buddy, Nate. I need a favor, Mason said, his voice eerily calm. Anything, brother, Nate replied. What's going on? I need someone followed. I need everything on them. Nate paused. You got it. Who's the target? Mason's lips curled into a humorless smile. My wife. Mason sat in his car outside his house, watching. The engine was off, the streetlights casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Savannah had no idea he was there. No idea that her little secret wasn't so secret anymore. A notification buzzed on his phone. A new message from Nate. Nate, got the first round of intel. She's been meeting Colton at a private hotel every Thursday. Got photos, timestamps. Sending everything now. Mason opened the images. There she was. Savannah, dressed to impress, standing outside a fancy hotel lobby, smiling as Colton wrapped an arm around her waist. They looked like a happy couple. Like a woman who had completely erased her husband from her life. Mason clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palm. But he didn't let his emotions take control. Not yet. This wasn't the battlefield, but it damn sure felt like one. And in war you didn't rush in blind. You planned, you positioned yourself, and when the time was right, you struck with deadly precision. He exhaled slowly. Game on. Mason wasn't going to just confront Savannah and let her cry her way out of this. He was going to destroy her. Piece by piece. But first, he was going to make her believe she was winning. The next morning Mason acted normal. When Savannah walked into the kitchen, wearing his oversized sweater like she hadn't been sleeping with another man, Mason smiled. Morning, babe. His voice was steady, easy. She blinked, a little caught off guard. Morning. He poured himself coffee, hiding the disgust bubbling in his chest. You free tonight? He asked casually. Maybe we can order in, have a movie night? Savannah hesitated. That hesitation told Mason everything he needed to know. She was already thinking of an excuse. I wish, but I have a meeting. It's a late one, she lied smoothly, pouring herself coffee like she wasn't stabbing him in the back. Mason nodded, pretending to believe her. Liar. All right, he said with a small chuckle. Next time then. Savannah kissed his cheek before heading upstairs. Mason wiped his cheek the second she was gone. He pulled out his phone and texted Nate. Mason, she took the bait. I want everything recorded tonight. Nate, consider it done. Mason leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was just the beginning. And Savannah had no idea she was walking straight into his trap. Hey, before we continue, where are you guys watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. I love seeing how far this story is reaching. And if you're hooked on the story so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps, and trust me, things are about to get crazy. Alright, let's get back to it. Chapter 6 is about to take this to a whole new level. That night, Mason didn't go to sleep. Instead, he sat in his truck a few blocks away from the hotel, waiting, watching, letting Savannah dig her own grave. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Mason's phone vibrated. A new message from Nate. Nate, she just checked in. Room 204. Got her on video. Mason smirked. Right on schedule. He scrolled through the security footage Nate had hacked from the hotel cameras. There she was. Savannah, wearing a short red dress, her wedding ring conveniently missing. Colton was already waiting for her, holding the door open like some second-rate movie villain. They kissed. Mason's stomach turned. But he didn't look away. He needed to see this. Needed to burn it into his brain. Because once a soldier saw the enemy clearly, it made pulling the trigger that much easier. Mason leaned back, exhaling. The videos. The proof. Everything was lining up perfectly. Savannah thought she was winning. But she had no idea that Mason Calloway was about to rip her world apart. Mason sat in his truck, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel as he stared at the screen of his phone. The hotel security footage played on loop. Savannah. Colton. Laughing. Kissing. Walking into a room together like they didn't have a single worry in the world. She thought she was getting away with this. She thought he was blind, weak, stupid. A slow, dark smile tugged at the corner of Mason's lips. Not anymore. His mind worked fast. Now wasn't the time to explode. Now was the time to start picking apart their lives, slowly, painfully, until they had nothing left. He sent a quick message to Nate. Mason, how much dirt can you get on Colton's business? Nate, plenty. I already started looking. His company's got some shady deals. Money laundering, insider trading, you name it. If you want to take him down legally, I can pull everything. Mason smirked. Perfect. Step 1. Cut off their resources. He wasn't just going to expose Savannah's affair. He was going to destroy Colton, ruin him so completely that Savannah would have nothing left to run to. Mason called a contact, an old friend who worked in the financial crime division of the FBI. Hey Logan. It's Mason. There was a pause. Then a surprised chuckle. Damn, Calloway. Haven't heard from you in years. What's up? I need to pass along some information, Mason said smoothly. You know Colton Decker, right? There was silence on the line. Then a low whistle. That slime ball? Yeah, we've had eyes on him for a while, but nothing solid. You got something? I will soon. Mason's eyes flicked back to the hotel footage. And when I do, I'll make sure it's airtight. Logan's voice turned serious. If you can get me real evidence, we can bury him. I mean bury him. Mason's smirk grew. That's exactly what I want. The next morning, Mason acted normal. Savannah came home at 6 a.m., slipping in quietly like she was some teenager sneaking back after a party. Mason was already in the kitchen making pancakes for Ryder. Morning, babe, he said without looking at her, keeping his voice casual, as if he wasn't picturing every betrayal. Savannah paused. He could feel her hesitation, the slight stiffness in her body. Hey, she said, forcing a yawn. Sorry I got in so late. Work ran longer than expected. Mason turned, meeting her eyes with an easy smile. All good. I figured. Liar. Savannah seemed relieved by his calmness. Yeah. I need coffee. She brushed past him and Mason watched her carefully. She wasn't nervous, because she thought she was still in control. That was good. That was exactly what he needed. Because tonight, he was going to shake that false confidence. That evening, Mason sat in his office, going through Savannah's credit card statements. A $4,000 charge at a luxury jewelry store last month. She hadn't bought anything for Mason. A $1,200 spa treatment last week. Hotel stays. Flights. Expensive wine deliveries. Mason clenched his jaw, his anger a slow, burning fire. There was no doubt anymore. She was spending money on Colton. Their money. His mind worked fast. He needed to strike now, just enough to shake her, make her panic. He transferred $30,000 from their joint account into his private one. A few minutes later, Savannah's phone buzzed. Mason listened from the hallway as she scrambled for it. What the hell? She whispered. Where did the money go? Mason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, voice smooth. Something wrong? Savannah's head snapped up. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Oh, no, it's, just a banking error, I think. She forced a smile. I'll check it later. Mason nodded slowly. The first crack in her confidence. Good. Now it was time for step 2. Savannah sat at the dining table, tapping furiously on her phone. Mason watched from the kitchen, pretending to sip his coffee as he studied her reaction. She was panicking. Good. Ugh, stupid bank, she muttered under her breath. I swear they always mess up transfers at the worst time. Mason raised an eyebrow. Something wrong? Savannah looked up, startled as if she had forgotten he was there. Oh no. Just, some money went missing from our account. Probably a glitch, she said quickly, forcing a laugh. Mason kept his face neutral. Probably. She looked back down at her phone, completely absorbed in whatever conversation she was having. Mason could guess exactly who she was texting. Colton. He knew Colton was in trouble. The evidence Nate had dug up was piling fast. Illegal business dealings, shell companies, money disappearing into offshore accounts. Mason had set the first domino in motion. And now, it was time to watch them fall. Colton Decker sat in his high-rise office, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. This isn't good, his accountant muttered across the desk. Funds are getting flagged. Your investors are nervous. And the IRS is snooping around. Colton's heart pounded. How? No one was supposed to know about those offshore accounts. The accountant exhaled, shaking his head. Someone leaked just enough information to start the fire. Colton's mind raced. Who the hell was coming after him? His phone buzzed again. A message from Savannah. Savannah, something's happening. $30,000 just disappeared from our account. I don't know if it's Mason or the bank, but I don't like it. Colton felt his stomach turn. Mason. That pathetic excuse for a man. Colton had never worried about Mason before. He was a broken soldier, a quiet fool. A man too soft to fight back. But now it felt like a storm was coming. Mason sat in his truck outside Ryder's school, watching his son run toward him with a smile. For a brief moment, all the anger, all the revenge faded into the background. Ryder. His boy. The only thing that truly mattered. "Hey buddy," Mason greeted, ruffling his hair. "How was school?" Ryder beamed. "Awesome. We learned about spies today. Did you know real spies can track people without being seen?" Mason chuckled. "Oh yeah. I think I'd be a pretty good spy." Ryder nodded, grinning. "Yeah, you would. You always notice everything." Mason smiled, but his mind was already 5 steps ahead. Tonight was the night. He was going to tear Savannah and Colton's world apart. Mason sat at his desk, laptop open, fingers moving fast. Everything was ready. He had compiled every piece of evidence into one explosive file. Screenshots of Savannah's affair. Colton's financial crimes. Hotel receipts, photos, text messages. Now he just had to drop the bomb. He drafted an email. To Savannah's family, her closest friends, Colton's business partners, a few select journalists. Subject: the truth about Savannah and Colton Decker. Mason hovered over the send button. His heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything changed. His finger pressed down. Set. Mason leaned back, exhaling. Now the real chaos begins. Savannah sat on the couch, her phone gripped so tightly her nails dug into her palm. Her world was crumbling. The messages poured in. Her mother. Her sister. Friends. "Savannah, what the hell is this? Are you serious? Is this real? You cheated on Mason? With that snake Colton?" Her heart pounded. Who sent this? How did they know? And then she saw it. An email. From Mason. Her stomach twisted. He knew. He had always known. Her hands trembled as she opened the attachment. Photos, bank statements, screenshots of texts she thought were deleted. Everything was there, laid out so perfectly, so devastatingly. Savannah gasped for air. No, no, no. She jumped up, dialing Colton. He picked up immediately. "Tell me you got the email," she snapped. "I got it." His voice was tense, angry. "And now my investors are calling. You said your husband was weak. That he wouldn't do anything." Savannah clenched her jaw. He was weak. But now Mason was something else. She needed to fix this. Fast. Her only hope was convincing Mason to stop this before it got worse. But something told her she was already too late. Mason sat at a small cafe, sipping his coffee, watching it unfold. His phone buzzed again. Nate. Dude, Savannah's family is roasting her in a group chat. Her mom called her a disgrace. Her sister is posting cryptic tweets about betrayal. It's bad. Mason exhaled slowly. He had seen too many people walk away from betrayal unscathed. Too many liars and cheaters continue their lives like they never shattered someone else's. But not this time. This time there were consequences. A news article flashed on his screen. CEO Colton Decker accused of fraud, investors pull out. Mason smiled. It was all coming together. And then his phone rang. Savannah. He let it ring. She was panicking now. Desperate. Let her sweat. She wanted to lie? She'd laugh at him when he was at his weakest? Now she got to see what it felt like to be powerless. Savannah stormed into Colton's penthouse, her hands shaking. She needed answers. Colton stood by the window, a drink in his hand, eyes cold. "What are you doing?" Savannah demanded. "We need to fix this." Colton scoffed, taking a slow sip. "Fix it? There is no fixing this. My name is ruined, my company is tanking. And it's all because of you." Savannah blinked. "Because of her?" "You said Mason wouldn't do anything," Colton continued, voice tight with anger. "You swore he was pathetic, that we'd be fine. And now I'm losing everything." Savannah stepped closer, panic creeping into her voice. "Colton, we can figure this out." But he laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. "Figure it out?" He shook his head. "I'm done, Savannah." Her stomach dropped. No, this wasn't happening. "You're done?" she whispered. Colton set his glass down. "I don't need this. You're a liability. Mason destroyed you, and now you're bringing me down too." Savannah felt her entire body go cold. He was leaving her. The man she destroyed her marriage for. The man she risked everything for. And now, she had no one. Savannah sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Her world was collapsing. Her family? Disgusted. Her friends? Gone. Colton? Vanished without a trace. She had nothing. The man she betrayed, the one she laughed at in his weakest moment, was the one who destroyed her effortlessly. Her mind raced as she stared at her phone. Mason hadn't responded to a single call or text. She needed to talk to him. Needed to fix this. With a deep breath, she pulled out of the parking lot and drove straight to his house. As she reached the front door, she hesitated. The home they built together now felt like foreign territory. She knocked. A few moments later, the door opened. Mason stood there, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "What do you want, Savannah?" His voice was calm, but there was no warmth. No emotion. Savannah swallowed. "Mason. Her voice cracked. She took a deep breath. "I messed up." Mason tilted his head. "You did." Tears burned her eyes. "Please, can we talk? I don't want things to end like this." Mason let out a slow breath. Then he said the words that shattered her completely. "They ended a long time ago, Savannah. You just didn't notice." Savannah flinched like she'd been slapped. Mason's voice remained steady, unshaken. "You didn't come here for Ryder. You didn't come here because you regret hurting me. You came here because you lost. And now you have no one left to run to." Savannah's lip trembled. "Mason, No," his voice was firm. "I'm done. You made your bed. Now lie in it." And with that, he shut the door in her face. For the first time, Savannah truly understood what it meant to lose. Savannah sat in the courtroom, feeling small as she faced the judge. Mason sat across from her, calm, composed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't anything. She had never seen him like this before. He wasn't the man she once manipulated. He was stronger. The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Calloway, you're requesting full custody of your son, Ryder Calloway?" Mason nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Savannah's lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, my client wishes to maintain joint custody." Mason didn't even flinch. "No." Savannah's stomach twisted. The judge turned to Mason. "On what grounds do you believe full custody is necessary?" Mason pulled out a thick file. "Infidelity, financial instability, and neglect." His voice was sharp, controlled. He slid the file forward. "Evidence is all there. Texts, photos, bank records, testimonies from family members stating she was absent even during Ryder's illness." Savannah's mouth went dry. Mason had planned for this. Her lawyer scrambled, flipping through the pages, but it was too much. Too much proof. Too much damage. The judge skimmed through the file, then looked at Savannah. "Miss Calloway, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Savannah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she never meant for it to go this far? The judge sighed, closing the folder. "I've reviewed the evidence." She turned to Mason. "Mr. Calloway, I'm granting you full custody of Ryder." Savannah's heart stopped. "No. No, no, no. You will have supervised visitation rights only," the judge continued. "And you will be required to attend a parental counseling program before requesting any changes." Savannah felt like she couldn't breathe. She had lost everything. Savannah sat in shock as the judge banged the gavel. It was over. She turned to Mason, expecting to see victory in his eyes. But there was nothing. Not even satisfaction. Just cold indifference. "Mason," she whispered as they walked out of the courtroom. He stopped but didn't turn around. "What?" She took a shaky breath. "Please, can't we go back? Start over?" Mason turned, looking at her with a gaze that sent chills down her spine. She had never seen him look at her like this before. "We don't go back, Savannah," he said. "You made sure of that." Savannah's heart shattered. She wanted to scream. To beg. But she knew it wouldn't matter. She watched as Mason walked away, holding Ryder's hand, heading toward a future she would never be part of. And for the first time, Savannah felt truly alone. Savannah sat on the edge of her motel bed, staring blankly at the stained wallpaper. She had nothing left. Her bank account? Empty. Her home? Gone. Her reputation? Destroyed. The only thing she had left was regret. She had called Mason 7 times today. Each call went straight to voicemail. She knew why. He wasn't ignoring her. He was done with her. Her phone buzzed, and for a second, hope flickered inside her. Maybe Mason had changed his mind. Maybe It wasn't Mason. It was a notification. Colton Decker arrested for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Savannah's breath caught in her throat. She scrolled through the article, her heart pounding. It was all there. Colton's secret accounts. His offshore laundering. His investors suing him. She clutched her phone, reading every detail with growing horror. And then she saw it, the last punch to her gut. A small note at the bottom of the article. Evidence provided by an anonymous source has confirmed Decker's fraudulent activities. Savannah knew exactly who that anonymous source was. Mason. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. He hadn't just destroyed her. He had destroyed the man she sacrificed everything for. Savannah realized in that moment that Mason had been playing a long game. And he had won. Mason sat on his back porch, a cold beer in his hand. The war was over. Savannah had lost. Colton was rotting in jail. And Mason? He was free. Ryder ran across the yard, laughing as he chased the family dog. For the first time in years, Mason felt at peace. His phone buzzed. A text from Savannah. Savannah, please. Just one conversation. I need to see Ryder. Mason stared at the message. He took a slow breath. Then he typed back. Mason, stay away from my son. If I ever see you near him again, you'll regret it. He hit send. And just like that, the last thread connecting them was cut forever. Mason leaned back, watching the sunset. Karma had done its job. Savannah was nothing but a ghost of his past. I gotta ask, where are you guys watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And hey, if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The next chapters are gonna be even crazier. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Alright, back to the story. Let's keep going. Savannah sat in her car outside Mason's house, watching. It had been days since the court ruling. Days since Mason told her to stay away. But she couldn't. She couldn't let go. She gripped the steering wheel, her breath shaky. Ryder was inside that house. Her baby. Her son. She had lost custody, lost Mason, lost everything. But maybe she could at least talk to Ryder. Maybe she could convince Mason that she had changed. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. She knocked. A few moments later, the door opened. But it wasn't Mason. It was Avery. The woman Mason was seeing. The woman Savannah had never met before but already despised. Avery raised an eyebrow. Can I help you? Savannah swallowed. I need to see Mason. Or Ryder. Avery tilted her head, her expression unbothered. That's not gonna happen. Savannah clenched her fists. Please. Avery smirked. You don't exist to them anymore, Savannah? Savannah felt like she had been punched in the gut. Avery's smile didn't fade. I'd leave if I were you. And with that, she shut the door. Savannah stood there, shaking. Mason had truly erased her from his life. For good. Colton Decker sat in the cold, gray walls of his holding cell, his world in ruins. The once powerful CEO, the man who thought he could take anything he wanted, now sat in a prison jumpsuit, awaiting trial. His lawyer sat across from him, flipping through papers. Colton, this case is airtight. With the evidence submitted, you're looking at 15 years minimum. Colton gritted his teeth. This is a setup. Someone's framing me. His lawyer gave him a blank stare. Colton, I've seen the files. The numbers. The transactions. You did this to yourself. Colton slammed his fists against the table. I can fix this. His lawyer sighed. No, you can't. Then the final blow. A letter from his biggest investors landed on the table. Notice of lawsuit. Decker Corporation and Colton Decker held liable for financial misconduct. Millions. Gone. His entire empire? Destroyed. And deep down, Colton knew who did it. Mason Calloway. The man he thought was weak. He wasn't weak. He was the one who set the trap and let Colton fall straight into it. As the prison guards came to take him away, Colton finally understood. This was karma. And there was no way out. Mason Calloway sat on the porch, watching Ryder run across the yard. For the first time in years, he felt free. No more betrayal. No more lies. No more looking over his shoulder. The war was over. Avery stepped outside, 2 glasses of iced tea in her hands. You look deep in thought. Mason smiled as she handed him a glass. Just taking it all in. She sat beside him. You deserve this, you know. Mason exhaled, staring at the sunset. Did he? For years he had fought. Fought for his son. Fought through pain. Fought through betrayal. Now finally he could breathe. A small voice pulled him from his thoughts. Dad. Ryder ran up to the porch, his eyes bright. Yeah, buddy? Ryder hesitated, then asked the one question Mason had been waiting for. Do you think Mom ever really loved us? Mason's heart clenched. He thought about Savannah. About all the lies, all the betrayal. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked his son in the eyes. Maybe she did. But love isn't just words, kid. It's what you do. Ryder nodded as if he understood. Yeah. You love me, right? Mason ruffled his hair, smiling. More than anything in the world. And for the first time in a long time, he meant it without any pain attached. Savannah sat in the motel bathroom, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself. Her once perfect hair? A mess. Her designer clothes? Pawned for cash. Her life? A wreck. She had called Mason. Begged him. He never answered. Colton was gone. Her friends had abandoned her. Her family wouldn't even pick up her calls. She was truly alone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through social media. A wedding picture of Mason and Avery flashed on the screen. They were smiling. Happy. Ryder stood beside them, holding Avery's hand. A new family. Savannah let out a shaky breath. She had been replaced. Erased. She reached for her phone, opening a new message to Mason. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could she even say? I'm sorry? Take me back? Underscore. She clenched her jaw. No. Mason was gone. Ryder was gone. And she would never get them back. Tears blurred her vision as she deleted the message. Because deep down she knew there was no fixing this. This was the life she chose. And now, she had to live with it. Savannah wandered aimlessly down the streets, her once confident stride now a slow, broken shuffle. She had nowhere to go. She passed a cafe in Frozen Place. Inside, through the large glass window, she saw them. Mason. Ryder. And her replacement, Avery. They were sitting at a table, laughing. Ryder leaned against Avery as she playfully ruffled his hair. Mason looked relaxed. Happy. Like the past didn't exist. Like Savannah never existed. Savannah's heart pounded as she stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the glass. That was her family. That was supposed to be her sitting beside Mason. Her holding Ryder's hand. She could feel the lump rising in her throat. She wanted to march inside, wanted to scream at Mason, at Avery, tell them they couldn't just erase her like this. But as she stared at them, really stared, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Mason was at peace. Not bitter. Not angry. Not broken. Just free. Savannah's breath hitched as she took a step back. No. No, she wasn't going to humiliate herself. Not again. She turned and walked away, her heart aching with the realization she could never undo what she had done. She would never be part of that life again. Savannah sat on a park bench, staring at the playground ahead. Ryder was there. Laughing, playing, completely carefree. Mason stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching his son with pride. He hadn't seen her yet. And maybe he never would. Savannah clenched her fists. This was her last chance. She stood, slowly making her way toward him. Mason noticed her before she even reached him. His face didn't change. No surprise. No anger. Just nothing. He didn't even look at her like a person he once loved. Just a stranger. Mason, she breathed, stopping in front of him. He didn't speak, just tilted his head slightly, waiting. Savannah swallowed. She needed to say something. Apologize. Beg. She looked past him toward Ryder. The little boy who used to call her mommy. Now he didn't even look her way. Because she didn't exist to him anymore. A wave of grief so strong it nearly took her knees out crashed over her. Mason followed her gaze. He doesn't remember you. Savannah's lips parted. What? Mason shrugged. I never talked bad about you to him. Never poisoned his mind. But kids, they remember love. They remember who was there. Savannah felt like she was drowning. She wanted to scream, to tell him it wasn't fair. But it was. It was completely fair. She had done this to herself. Mason sighed, his voice softer than she expected. Go live your life, Savannah. Whatever that means now. And then? He turned and walked away. Savannah stood there, watching as her son ran into another woman's arms, Avery's arms. That was it. That was the last time she would ever see them again. Savannah sat in the motel room, the silence deafening. She had spent weeks trying. Weeks begging. Weeks convincing herself that maybe, just maybe, Mason would soften. But he didn't. Ryder was gone. Colton was in prison. Her parents had cut her off. She had lost everything. She stared at her phone, opening the last message she had sent Mason. Savannah, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I'm sorry. The text had been sent 3 weeks ago. It was still marked unread. Savannah let out a broken, hollow laugh. She was officially nothing. Mason wasn't ignoring her out of hate. He just didn't care anymore. And somehow that was worse than anything. Mason stood outside Ryder's school, leaning against his truck, watching as kids ran out the front doors. Ryder spotted him instantly and sprinted forward, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. Dad. Ryder called, breathless as he reached Mason. Guess what? Mason crouched to meet his son's excited gaze. What's up, bud? We had a family project today, Ryder said, grinning. We had to draw our families and I made ours with you and me and Avery. Mason's heart squeezed. Avery. She hadn't tried to replace Savannah. She never forced anything. But somehow she had become a mother figure in Ryder's life without even trying. She helped me color it in, Ryder added, looking up proudly. And my teacher said it was awesome. Mason ruffled Ryder's hair. I bet it was. As they walked to the truck, Ryder tilted his head. Hey, Dad. Yeah. Do you ever get sad about the past? Ryder's voice was curious, not heavy. Like, do you ever wish things were different? Mason exhaled, staring at his son, the one person he had fought for through all the pain. No, Mason said firmly. Because everything that happened brought us here. And I wouldn't change that for anything. Ryder smiled as if that answer made perfect sense. Mason opened the truck door and as Ryder climbed in, Mason let go of the last piece of his past. Because the truth was, he had already won. Savannah sat outside a small rundown diner, staring into her coffee cup. She looked at her reflection in the dark liquid, but she barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes. Hollow cheeks. A life that had completely fallen apart. The door jingled as someone new walked in. Savannah barely looked up, until she heard a familiar voice. Didn't expect to see you in a place like this. Her breath caught. Her sister Lisa. Savannah straightened in her seat. Lisa hadn't spoken to her in months. Lisa slid into the booth across from her, folding her arms. Mom told me you called again. She still doesn't want to talk to you. Savannah swallowed. I wanted to explain. Lisa scoffed. Explain what, Savannah? How you betrayed the best man you'll ever have. How you destroyed your family for a guy who dumped you the second things got tough. Savannah flinched. Or, Lisa continued, her voice colder now, do you want to explain how you sat there and laughed at Mason while he was in the hospital saving your son's life? Savannah's stomach twisted. Lisa leaned forward. You have no one to blame but yourself. You made your choice, Savannah. Savannah's hands clenched around her coffee mug. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Lisa shook her head, pushing back from the table. And yet here we are. She stood up. You need to stop calling us. We've all moved on. Maybe it's time you did too. Savannah opened her mouth, but Lisa was already walking away. And just like that, the last person who still acknowledged her was gone. Savannah sat in silence, staring at the empty seat across from her. Because Lisa was right. She had made her choice. And now, she had to live with it. Mason was in the garage working on an old motorcycle when his phone buzzed. A new email. From Savannah. He stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to open it. Finally he clicked it. The message was short. Savannah, I know I've lost everything. I know I don't deserve another chance. I just want to say that I'm sorry, even if it doesn't change anything. Mason read it twice. Then, without hesitation, he deleted it. Because Savannah still didn't get it. It wasn't about an apology. It was about the damage that couldn't be undone. There was no revenge left to take. She had already destroyed herself. And Mason? He was already living the life he deserved. With a deep breath, he set his phone down, wiped the grease from his hands and walked inside, to the life that was waiting for him. And just like that, he closed the door on Savannah forever. The rain poured mercilessly, soaking Savannah as she huddled under the awning of a closed store. She had nowhere to go. Her motel stay? Expired. She had no money left to extend it. Her car? Repossessed. Her last hope? Gone. She had called her parents again, her voice shaking. Please, Mom. Just for a few nights, she had begged. Her mother's voice had been quiet but firm. "Savannah, we love you. But we can't keep rescuing you from your own mistakes. It's time for you to figure it out." The line had gone dead. And now here she was, homeless, freezing, and utterly alone. She thought about going to Mason's house, just to see Ryder even from a distance. But she already knew how that would end. Mason wouldn't open the door. Avery would look at her with that same calm, unbothered stare. Ryder wouldn't even recognize her. Savannah's chest tightened as a wave of regret so crushing it made her breathless washed over her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the one who won. Instead, she had lost everything. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her once manicured fingers clutched the soaked fabric of her coat. Once she had thousands of dollars at her fingertips. Now she had nothing. And for the first time in her life, she had no one to blame but herself. Inside the high-security prison, Colton Decker sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall. His days of power, money, and luxury? Over. His ex-business partners had abandoned him. His lawyers had dropped his case. And his trial had ended with a brutal, non-negotiable sentence. 15 years. 15 years behind bars. 15 years of being forgotten by the world. The guards barely looked at him. The other inmates? They knew his type. Rich men who thought they were untouchable, until they weren't. Colton clenched his jaw. He had one last shot. His appeal. His lawyer had filed for a reduced sentence, claiming he had been set up. But the judge's ruling came in today. A guard walked toward his cell, holding the letter in his hands. "Your appeal just came back," the guard said, tossing it through the bars. Colton grabbed it, his fingers shaking as he tore open the envelope. His eyes skimmed over the words. Then, his stomach dropped. Appeal denied. No way out. No second chances. No power left. And worst of all, Mason Calloway had won. Mason sat in his truck, parked outside his old house. The house he had shared with Savannah. The for sale sign stood in the yard, flapping slightly in the breeze. The house was empty now. A shell of what it used to be. Mason hadn't set foot inside since the divorce was finalized. And now, he never would. He didn't need to anymore. Because this place? It wasn't home. Not anymore. His real home was with Ryder. With Avery. With the life he had built after all the destruction. The past had taken enough from him. It wasn't going to take a second more. With one last glance, Mason pulled out of the driveway. He never looked back. And just like that, he left Savannah, Colton, and everything tied to them behind, forever. The shelter smelled like sweat, old fabric, and desperation. Savannah sat on a creaky cot, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She had spent the last 3 nights here, her last option after running out of places to go. The first night, she had broken down, sobbing into her pillow. The second night, the reality of her life hit her. This was her new world now. No more designer clothes. No more luxurious brunches with the wives of executives. No more expensive gifts from men who thought she was worthy. All she had now was a trash bag filled with what little she had left. She had spent the morning walking aimlessly through town, hoping for something, anything, to turn around. A job? A friend willing to help? Even a kind stranger? Nothing. People avoided her like she was invisible. The same people she once looked down on, she now walked among. She pulled her thin blanket around herself, trying to stop the cold from creeping into her bones. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. This was her life now. And worst of all, no one was coming to save her. Mason stood at the counter of his new home, flipping pancakes while Ryder sat at the kitchen table, coloring. Avery walked in yawning. "Smells amazing," she murmured, wrapping her arms around Mason from behind. Mason smiled, flipping the last pancake onto the plate. This was his life now. A life without pain. A life without betrayal. A life where he was free. Avery pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "So, I was thinking," she said casually, "we should take Ryder on a vacation. Maybe a road trip before school starts again?" Mason glanced at Ryder, who had perked up immediately. "Really?" Ryder beamed. "Can we go to Disneyland?" Mason chuckled. "Disneyland, huh? That's a big request, buddy." Avery nudged him. "Come on, you know he deserves it." Mason looked at Ryder's hopeful face. He had fought so hard to give his son a life free of chaos. Maybe it was time to let go completely. "All right," Mason said, grinning. "Disneyland it is." Ryder cheered, pumping his fist in the air. Avery laughed, leaning against Mason. "You're a good dad, you know that?" Mason exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time he believed it. Savannah wiped sweat from her forehead, her body aching from hours of standing. She had finally managed to get a job at a diner, a place that would have disgusted her a year ago. Now, it was the only thing keeping her from starving. The manager, an older woman named Linda, walked past and gave her a tired look. "Keep up, Savannah," Linda muttered. "Customers don't like waiting." Savannah gritted her teeth and forced herself to move faster. The lunch rush was brutal. She dropped a plate. A man complained that his coffee wasn't hot enough. A mother scolded her for forgetting extra napkins. Savannah had never worked for anything in her life. Now, she was at the bottom. She caught her reflection in the stainless steel counter. A waitress uniform. No makeup. No designer jewelry. Just a tired, broken woman trying to survive. She wasn't ready for this. She wanted to scream. She wanted her old life back. But that life? It was never coming back. She had thrown it all away. And there was no one left to blame but herself. Savannah sat in the tiny break room of the diner, staring at her phone. The old device had cracks across the screen, the battery barely lasting a few hours. Her hands trembled as she typed out another message to Mason. "Savannah, please. Just one conversation. I know I don't deserve it, but I just need to talk to you." She hovered over the send button. Would he read it? Would he ignore it like all the others? Her heart pounded as her thumb pressed send. The message disappeared into the void. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Then an hour. Nothing. Savannah's throat tightened as she gripped the phone. Her hands clenched into fists. She had never begged for anything in her life. And yet, here she was, reduced to nothing, waiting for a reply that would never come. Her stomach twisted. She thought about driving to his house. Just to see him. Just to prove to him that she wasn't the same person she used to be. But she knew better. Mason wasn't ignoring her out of hate. He just didn't care anymore. And somehow that hurt more than anything. Savannah closed her eyes, letting reality sink in. She had lost. Completely. And the worst part? No one was coming to save her. Mason was walking out of a hardware store, carrying a few supplies for the house, when he saw her. Savannah. She was standing on the sidewalk, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, wearing a waitress uniform. She looked thin. Tired. A shell of the woman she once was. She hadn't seen him yet. Mason's first instinct was to walk away. But then Savannah's eyes met his. For a brief moment, everything went silent. There was no anger left in Mason. No rage. Nothing. Savannah took a small step forward as if she was about to say something. Maybe a desperate apology, maybe another plea. But Mason just looked at her, his expression unreadable. And then, he turned around and walked away. He didn't need to hear what she had to say. Because it didn't matter anymore. Savannah stood frozen, watching as Mason disappeared into the crowd. She felt something inside her break completely. This was it. The final goodbye. She had been replaced. Forgotten. And there was no coming back from that. Mason sat on his back porch that evening, watching Ryder play with their dog. Avery walked out with 2 glasses of lemonade, setting one beside him. "You're quiet today," she said softly. Mason exhaled. "I saw Savannah." Avery raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. She looked. Mason hesitated. Lost. Avery studied him for a moment. "Do you feel bad for her?" Mason thought about it. For a split second, maybe. But then he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I don't. Because in the end she made her choices. And Mason? He was finally free." He reached for Avery's hand, squeezing it gently. She smiled. "Come inside. Dinner's ready." Mason stood, glancing one last time at the setting sun. The past was over. And now, he was ready for the future. Mason sat at the kitchen table, flipping through some papers while Ryder worked on his homework. "Dad," Ryder said suddenly, putting his pencil down. "Do you ever think about her?" Mason knew exactly who he meant. Savannah. He set his papers aside, leaning forward. "What made you ask that?" Ryder shrugged. "I heard some kids at school talking about their moms today. I don't really remember her much." Mason's chest tightened slightly, but he didn't lie to his son. "That's okay," he said simply. "People remember the ones who love them. The ones who show up. That's what really matters. Ryder seemed to think about that for a moment, then smiled. Yeah, I guess you're right. Mason ruffled his hair. You hungry? Ryder grinned. Always. As Mason got up to start dinner, he glanced at his phone. Another unread message from Savannah. This time he didn't even hesitate. He deleted it without reading it. Because the past? It was dead. And Savannah? She wasn't his problem anymore. Before we continue, where are you guys watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far this story is reaching. And hey, if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Trust me, the last few chapters are going to be insane. Don't miss them. Savannah sat on a park bench, watching the world move around her. People laughing. Families walking together. Mothers holding their children's hands. A sharp pain twisted in her chest. That was supposed to be her. She was supposed to be walking with Mason and Ryder, still part of their lives. But instead, she was nothing to them. Then, like a ghost from her past, she saw him. Mason walking down the sidewalk, looking as strong and confident as ever. Avery was by his side, her hand resting lightly in his. And Ryder? Ryder was holding Avery's hand. A pang of pure, agonizing regret shot through Savannah's body. Her son, her own son, had replaced her. And she had no one to blame but herself. Mason didn't see her. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge her. Savannah wanted to call out, to say something, but she knew it wouldn't matter. So instead she just watched them walk away. Forever. That evening, Mason and Ryder sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Dad, Ryder asked, swinging his legs. Do you think she's okay? Mason sighed. Karma always finds its way, son, he said simply. People get what they deserve. Ryder seemed to think about it for a moment, then nodded. I like our life now, he said softly. Mason smiled, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. So do I, kid, he murmured. So do I. And with that, Mason let go of the past completely. Because some people, they don't deserve a second chance. The neon lights from the street flickered through the cracked window of Savannah's tiny apartment. The place smelled of stale air and cheap takeout, a far cry from the luxurious home she once shared with Mason. She sat at the wobbly kitchen table, staring at an eviction notice. Final warning, rent past due. Her hands trembled as she ran her fingers through her greasy, unwashed hair. There was nothing left to sell. No friends left to borrow money from. No way out. Savannah had called every possible number. Old friends, distant relatives, all ignored her. She had burned every bridge. Now she had one last option. Her eyes flickered to the cheap phone sitting on the table. Mason. She had avoided calling him directly for months, knowing he would never answer. But tonight she had nothing left to lose. With shaky fingers she dialed. Ring. Her breath caught in her throat. Ring. She gripped the phone tighter. Click. The call connected. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She opened her mouth, trying to find the right words. Then, a robotic voice filled the line. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Savannah froze. She pulled the phone away, staring at the screen in disbelief. She tried again. Same message. Mason hadn't just blocked her. He had changed his number. For a moment she sat there, completely still. Then, she screamed, a raw, broken sound of pure rage and regret. Because this was it. The final door had closed. And Mason Calloway had erased her from his life completely. Mason stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Tonight was a big night. Avery's charity event, the first one she was hosting since their engagement. He glanced down at his phone, an unread email notification at the top. Savannah Calloway, an O subject. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. Savannah had sent hundreds of messages in the past few months. Some apologizing, some begging, some filled with rage. He had read none of them. Because the past? It didn't exist anymore. A soft knock on the door made him turn. Avery stood there, smiling in her elegant dress. Ready? Mason took one last look at his phone. Then, without a second thought, he deleted the email. Yeah, he said, turning toward the future. I'm ready. And just like that, he let Savannah go forever. Later that night, after the charity event, Mason sat on the porch with Ryder, the cool night air wrapping around them. Dad, Ryder said, his voice quiet. Do you think Mom ever really loved us? Mason stared at the stars for a moment. How do you explain betrayal to a child? Finally he exhaled. I think she loved herself more, he said honestly. And sometimes that's not enough. Ryder didn't say anything at first. Then slowly he nodded. I don't really remember her, he admitted. I know she was there, but it's blurry. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. That's okay, buddy. Ryder leaned his head against Mason's arm. I'm glad we have Avery, he said softly. Mason smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of his son's head. Me too, kid, he whispered. And just like that, the last piece of Savannah Calloway faded from their lives. Forever. The walls of the shelter felt like they were closing in. The small cot in the corner smelled of mildew, the thin blanket offering little warmth against the cold. Savannah never imagined her life would come to this. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the fabric of her worn-out jeans, staring at the small burner phone she had managed to buy with the last of her savings. No calls. No messages. No hope. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through Mason's social media. She wasn't blocked, he didn't even need to block her. He simply didn't care anymore. His profile was filled with pictures of Ryder smiling, of Mason laughing, of their new life. And then, the latest photo. Mason and Avery standing side by side at a charity event, looking perfect together. Savannah's vision blurred with tears. That was supposed to be her. She had it all. A husband who loved her. A son who adored her. Stability, comfort, a home. And now she was nobody. She wanted to scream. She wanted to destroy something. But all she could do was sit there, shaking as the weight of her own destruction finally crushed her. For years she thought she was in control. She thought she was smarter than Mason. But Mason didn't have to fight her. He just had to let karma do the work. And karma? Karma had buried her alive. Savannah wiped her eyes, forcing herself to sit up. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pen from the shelter's donation box, her fingers shaking as she started to write. Dear Mason, I know I don't deserve your time. I know you've moved on. But I need to say this even if you never read it. I ruined everything. I was selfish, cruel, and I never understood what I had until it was gone. I know now that you never deserved what I did to you. You were always good to me. And Ryder deserved better than me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to respond. But I need you to know. I'm sorry. I hope you and Ryder find happiness. You deserve it. Savannah. She stared at the letter for a long moment, tears dripping onto the page. Would Mason even open it? Would he tear it up the second he saw her name? A part of her hoped he would at least read it. Because she needed him to know she had lost and she knew it. She folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. And for the first time she accepted that she would never get her old life back. This wasn't a battle anymore. She had already lost. Mason was sitting on the porch when the letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. Savannah. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Avery walked outside, handing him a cup of coffee. She noticed the letter in his hands. Are you going to read it? She asked softly. Mason exhaled, turning the envelope over. I don't know. Avery sat beside him, placing a hand on his. You don't have to. Mason thought about it. Savannah's words didn't matter anymore. She didn't matter anymore. But maybe this wasn't about her. Maybe this was the final closure he needed. Slowly, he tore the envelope open and unfolded the letter. His eyes moved over the words. I ruined everything. You never deserved what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know. I'm sorry. Mason read the letter twice. Then, he crumpled it up and tossed it into the fire pit. The flames flickered as the paper curled and burned, turning to ash. Avery watched in silence. No regrets. Mason shook his head. No regrets. Because he didn't need Savannah's apology. She had to live with what she did. He didn't. Mason sipped his coffee, watching the last of Savannah's words turn to dust. And just like that, she was gone. Forever. Mason sat in the backyard watching Ryder play with their dog. The soft evening breeze carried laughter through the air, a sound Mason had fought so hard to protect. He took a sip of his beer, staring into the fire pit where Savannah's letter had burned the night before. The past was finally dead. Avery stepped outside, sliding the door shut behind her. She walked over, sitting next to Mason. You okay? She asked, watching him closely. Mason exhaled. Yeah, I think I am. She leaned against him. I saw you burn the letter. He nodded. She wanted closure. But I didn't need it. Avery tilted her head, studying him. Do you feel different? Mason thought about it. For years, Savannah had been a shadow over his life. Even when he had moved forward, her betrayal had always been there, lingering in the back of his mind. But now, she was gone. He had no anger left for her. No sadness. Not even hatred. Just nothing. Mason met Avery's eyes. I feel free. She smiled, lacing her fingers through his. Good. You deserve that. Mason squeezed her hand, looking at Ryder. They had survived. They had built something stronger than what was lost. And now, the past couldn't touch them anymore. Savannah walked through the streets, her body thin and frail. Her job at the diner barely covered her rent, her meals consisting of whatever leftovers she could sneak at work. She passed by a bakery, her stomach twisting as the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Then she saw him. Mason. He was standing outside a small cafe, laughing with Avery and Ryder. Savannah's breath caught in her throat. They looked perfect. Mason had never looked like that with her. Not in years. And Ryder? He looked happy. She wanted to go to him. To say something, anything. But deep down she knew it wouldn't matter. Mason was done with her. Ryder had forgotten her. And she? She was just a stranger now. Savannah took a shaky step back, turning before Mason could see her. As she walked away, she felt something break inside her. Because this wasn't just regret. This was the weight of every choice she had made crashing down at once. And now, there was no way to fix it. Mason stood in the living room, packing Ryder's suitcase. Tomorrow they were heading on their first family vacation. Disneyland. Ryder was bouncing with excitement. Dad, do you think Mickey Mouse will know my name? Mason chuckled. I bet he will, buddy. Avery walked in, carrying snacks for the trip. I can't wait to see Ryder's face when we get there. Mason smiled, watching his son beam with happiness. This was what life was supposed to be. Not pain. Not betrayal. Just love. And for the first time in years, Mason knew. He had won. Because karma never forgets. Savannah sat on a rusted metal bench at the edge of a city park, watching the world move around her. Mothers walked by, holding the hands of their giggling children. Families gathered around picnic tables, sharing food and laughter. A few couples strolled down the path, wrapped in quiet conversations. She watched it all, but she was not part of it. She had been once. Once she had everything. But now she was no one. The last few months had been a brutal punishment, one she knew she had earned. The cold rejection from Mason. The absence of Ryder, who probably didn't even remember her face anymore. The silence from her own family, who had disowned her after the court battle. And worst of all, Colton was gone. He was sitting in a prison cell, counting down the years while she was out here just as trapped as he was. The world had moved on, but she had nowhere to go. She reached into her purse and pulled out her last $20 bill. $20. That was all she had left. Tears burned her eyes as she thought about the way she used to live. Expensive handbags. Luxury vacations. Designer jewelry. She had spent thousands of dollars like it was nothing. And now, she was debating between buying food or paying for a night at the shelter. Her stomach growled. She pressed a hand against it, closing her eyes. She had done this to herself. She had laughed at Mason when he was at his weakest. She had mocked his loyalty, his love. And in return, life had shown her exactly what it felt like to be discarded. She opened her eyes, wiping her tears quickly. The past was gone. There was only one thing left to do. She had to start over. Alone. No Mason. No Ryder. No second chances. She had lost them. And no amount of regret could ever bring them back. Savannah stood, gripping the $20 bill in her fist. Then she turned away, walking toward the only future left for her. Mason sat at the airport gate, waiting for their flight. Ryder was beside him, drawing in a sketchbook, his little legs swinging happily. Avery sat across from them, sipping on coffee, glancing at Mason with a soft smile. Their vacation was about to begin, the first of many. Dad, Ryder said suddenly, not looking up from his drawing. Yeah, but. Ryder hesitated, his pencil pausing. Do you think Mom ever thinks about me? Mason's chest tightened. He had tried so hard to make sure Ryder never felt abandoned. But deep down, Mason knew some part of his son still wondered. He exhaled slowly. I think she does. Mason admitted. But thinking about someone and showing up for them are two different things. Ryder nodded thoughtfully, adding details to his picture. Then he shrugged. That's okay. I have you and Avery. That's all I need. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. His son had already moved on. And so had he. A final notification appeared on Mason's phone, an email from Savannah. Mason didn't open it. Instead, he deleted it. Because this time, Savannah wasn't even worth a second thought. Avery reached for his hand, squeezing gently. Ready to go? She asked. Mason smiled. Yeah, I am. The past was over. And this time it was staying buried forever. The ocean waves crashed gently against the shore as Mason stood barefoot in the sand, watching Ryder run toward the water, his laughter blending with the sounds of the seagulls overhead. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm oranges and purples. It was perfect. Avery walked up beside him, slipping her hand into his. Not bad, huh? She teased, nudging him playfully. Mason exhaled, his lips curling into a small smile. Yeah, not bad at all. They had just arrived at their beachfront rental for the next week, Ryder's dream vacation. A life filled with peace, love, and new memories. A life without Savannah. Mason had let her go completely. Her emails? Deleted without a second thought. Her name? Not spoken in their home. Her existence? A ghost of the past, erased from their future. She had chosen lies, betrayal, and greed. And now, she was a nameless face in a crowd, forgotten by the people who once loved her. Mason had no anger left for her. No pity. No need for revenge. Because karma had already done its job. He had won. And Savannah? She had lost everything. Ryder turned, waving excitedly. Come on, Dad. The water's warm. Mason chuckled, squeezing Avery's hand before jogging toward his son. As he lifted Ryder into the air, spinning him around, he realized he was finally free. No more betrayal. No more heartbreak. Just the life he always deserved. The past? Dead and buried. The future? Is to create. And for the first time in years, Mason Calloway felt whole again. Mason has won. Savannah has lost. Karma never forgets. Wow, what a ride. If you love this story, make sure to like this post. Let's see how many people loved Mason's journey. Share this story with your friends, because karma is real. Subscribe for more crazy, intense, and gripping stories like this. Now tell me in the comments. Do you think Mason was right to completely erase Savannah from his life? Or should he have given her one final chance to be in Ryder's life? Comment below. Let's talk about it. Thanks for reading. Stay tuned for more epic stories coming soon.